Let's bring in our colleague, anchor of the story, Martha MacCallum is here, Fox News contributor, Jonathan Turley joining us as well. Martha, we all spent a lot of time together on Saturday night, went through a lot, and thank gosh, I keep saying everybody's okay. But we look back at that night and we think, you know, does the Secret Service, first and foremost, President Trump's talking about doing this again within the next 30 days, can they secure the president in that environment at that hotel?
I mean, I'm not a security expert, nor am I former Secret Service, but just as a regular civilian and somebody who was there, it's really hard for me to imagine how they can repeat this at that venue. And honestly, it's always been a little hard for me to understand how they pull this off. You think about the fact that when you do a State of the Union address, you have designated survivors who are outside the building. There was almost everyone in the chain of command and who would replace the president was inside that venue the other night. So I think it's very, very difficult. I think they're going to have to do it in a very different way. I don't think that venue should hold 2,500 people. You can't get around the tables, as evidenced by people climbing, the security guards climbing over the tables. I'm shocked that the fire marshals allow that number of people in that room to begin with. So I think, you know, when Susie Wild meets with Secret Service, they're going to get creative and figure out a better way to do it.
I've been surprised about that last point since I started going to those things. In 1999, it's like I thought to myself way back then, if there was ever a fire or an emergency, you'd never get people out of here. Want to talk about the overall mentality of this alleged shooter, of the left in general. Here's what Will Ricardell, a Fox News digital managing editor for Politics, wrote. The WHCA alleged shooter wasn't some nut job lurking on the fringes of society, Professor, forgotten by the system. He was well-educated, credentialed, employed, and institutionally formed. And that's what makes this so disturbing. At first glance, this doesn't look like a breakdown of the system. It looks more like a product of it. Academia, media, and politics help build the moral permission structure. Let that sink in. Now, I think he makes some pretty salient points there, Professor.
No, he certainly does. You know, I've written 2 books on political rage, including Rage in the Republic, and it talks about these politicians who are fueling this rage. They're injecting it directly into the body politic. Many politicians today believe they can ride this rage wave back into power in the midterms. What they don't appreciate is that when you fuel that rage, you really can't control it. There are people out there who will use it as a license to commit violence, and that's what we saw here. And this was a highly functioning individual. This is not someone who's going to be able to make an insanity defense. This is someone who did a calculated and nearly successful effort to enter that room. And it didn't just happen in a vacuum. You know, many of the things on his manifesto are statements that come close to those I quote in my book, coming from politicians. This constant drumbeat that gives people this sense of license, this sense of entitlement, this righteous rage that can produce such violence.
You know, Martha, there's a new Truth Social out. Appears to have just posted in the past couple of minutes while Caroline Leavitt was wrapping that briefing from the president. President Trump posting to his Truth Social about the Jimmy Kimmel comments about his wife, the First Lady. He says, wow, Jimmy Kimmel, who's in no way funny, as attested to by his terrible television ratings, made a statement on his show that is really shocking. He showed a fake video of the First Lady Melania and our son Barron, like they were actually sitting in his studio listening to him speak, which they were not and never would be, and then stated, quote, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow. A day later, President Trump says a lunatic tried entering the ballroom of the White House Correspondents' Dinner loaded up with a shotgun, handgun, and many knives. He was there for a very obvious and sinister reason. I appreciate that so many people are incensed by Kimmel's despicable call to violence and normally would not be responsive to anything that he said, but this is something far beyond the pale. Jimmy Kimmel should be immediately fired, President Trump writes by Disney at ABC. Thank you for your attention to this matter, signed President Donald J. Trump. But Martha, you just heard the press secretary asked multiple times, including by our own Aisha Hasni, about those comments about the First Lady. When does this stop?
Well, you know, I think it stops when we answer the question, who will go first? Who will be the Jimmy Kimmel type person? And I don't think it's going to be Jimmy Kimmel. based on what we've seen so far. And I also just, as a side note, think about the protection that the press has always given to families of the presidents of the United States. I think about Amy Carter as a young child. You think about Malia and Sasha Obama, and just the reverence and sort of respect that has surrounded first ladies and families. And for some reason, and there is no logical explanation, no matter how hard some of these individuals might try to convince you, there is no reason for an exception to be made, and the kind of hatred that has been leveled against this family and against the First Lady, and in this case, putting Barron in that video as well. I think it's incredibly reprehensible. So my question is, everyone says this, right? Where is it going to stop? Where's this red? I'm looking for one of these individuals to stand up and say, I'm going to be first.
Well, it looks like Mr. Kimmel may have just used up his 9th life. We'll see. But, you had professor protesters outside of that venue last night where there really was a security cordon outside. Once you got inside, it was a lot more lax. But you had them holding up signs saying death to tyrants, other reasons to justify the assassination of President Trump. The one responsible Democrat to see, well, other than John Fetterman, who was out there last night and in the wake of this, was Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez from Washington, who posted this on X: please stop trying to murder the president. I mean, finally, a voice of rationality from the left.
Right, John, can you imagine just a few years ago, if someone said that that would be a necessary tweet or posting, we would have said, what universe are you living in? But that's the value of rage politics. It strips people of their humanity. It allows people to hate completely, to hate people so you don't have to consider them people anymore, so that you don't have restraints and you have no guilt. And what people don't recognize about their rage is that they like it and they need it, and it's addictive. And that's what you see outside. We've all been to the Correspondents' Dinner. We've seen these protesters outside who are just frothing with rage about the people at these dinners, but particularly about President Trump and his administration. And you see that addiction. And so the question is, I think that Martha's so correct on this when she says, who will be first? Mm-hmm. Who will step out first and say, you know what? This is wrong, and it has to stop.
These are the words of Kash Patel, the FBI director, talking about the ability to secure the president should they decide to, and it looks like they are planning to, Martha, host this dinner again. Listen.
We're going to do this again in short order, maybe in 30 days or so, and we're going to be ready for that. The security posture, I imagine, is going to be completely different. The FBI will be fully resourced for that event to assist in the security, and we will provide our input.
Because President Trump seems adamant that he wants this to go on. He doesn't want the bad guys, like the suspect we're about to see appear in court, to stop life from happening and to stop events from like this from going on. Martha, I go back to that night, Saturday night, and we were all sitting and we were waiting for an update because President Trump apparently was wanting to come back out after, and the Secret Service eventually determined that there was no way to possibly secure the room to have him come back out. But that's why he's adamant about hosting or having this again. It's amazing to think that that might even be a possibility based on what we just saw Saturday night, but maybe it's important it does happen, Martha.
Well, I think that's his DNA. He wants the show to go on. And he said, and you could see that he was disappointed and that he hoped that this would be a night for him to sort of build a relationship with some in the press who are very negative towards him. I think he wanted to embrace the room on Saturday night. And I think he was just disappointed that it wasn't going to happen and that so many people were going to be let down. So he said, look, we're going to do this again. And he said in those initial comments at the press briefing at the White House, don't let this be taken away from you. You want to do this event. We can't let people stop these things. It reminded me of, the post 9/11 mentality. Don't let the terrorists win. Go ahead, live your life, and don't let there be a level of satisfaction in this. I went back and forth with Jackie Heinrich just a little bit on this question of where it could be. It seems like they're trying to figure out based on Jackie's reporting, and she's obviously part of the organization and will be the president next term, that they want to do it at the Washington Hilton and that they're figuring out a way to do it. And one of the ways that they're talking about would be to have a designated entrance to the ballroom that is separate from the hotel so that there's absolutely no mingling between hotel guests and no way to get in without a QR code, because we all know, like, you just flashed your paper ticket, which you could have handed to somebody online and gotten in. It was pretty loose.
You know, one of the things that I noticed, because I stayed at the hotel with my wife on Saturday night, we ended up actually bailing out, not using the room, but I parked our car, which was an SUV in the self-parking, under the hotel, and then because I had a virtual key, I took my luggage, which was her gown, my tux, and an overnight bag, went into the entrance from the garage, got in the elevator, flashed my virtual key up to our floor, and went right up. So, I mean, I just had luggage, but I could have brought anything into that hotel, and it would appear that that's what this gunman did.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.